Welcome to the Clear Cut Chronicles podcast with your hosts, Matt Anderson and Tyler Nicola.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Clear Cut Chronicles podcast with your host, Matt Anderson and Tyler Nicola. We are here today for the first time with a guest. And so we're super excited to kind of dive into some public land hunting and some strategy talk here with John Garcia, who is one of Tyler's buddies. Why don't you go ahead and introduce John for us there, Tyler?
Yes, sir. John, congratulations on being our first guest on the show. You've been
thank you.
A good buddy of mine since I was in high school. You were older than me, maybe a bit of a bad influence, but might have taught me a few things too. But Matt and I were talking about guests possibly having the show. You stood out right away. Obviously, you're a friend of mine, so it's easy to approach you and ask you to do something like this. But in addition to that, you shot an awesome buck on public land in northern Wisconsin last year. So definitely wanted to pick your brain about that. But how you doing tonight, buddy?
Good. It's been great. I'm looking forward to the hunting season, actually. Got a couple cold days here, and it kind of gives you the itch a little bit.
July 22nd today. So, I mean, deer are starting to show their antlers pretty nicely, but I personally haven't been seeing too many nice bucks yet, at least in the fields around me. But
yeah. I haven't seen much out and about either yet, but
yeah, I saw one good one a couple weekends ago, ironically, kind of in the area that you're in, John, when we were coming back from a restaurant and bar, and my wife told me to keep my eyes on the road. She didn't seem too impressed with the nice, what looks like it was going to be either an 8 or a 10, but I mean, he was already outside his ears, but they always look bigger this time of the year too, with the velvet. But yeah, I let my dogs out this morning, and I felt it in the air and came running downstairs, and my wife was still in bed, and I was like, oh, it feels like fall out there. Like, let's go. And she's like, you're crazy. So I know. And we're going to get back to it looks like, at least, I don't know, here in the Twin Cities, it's going to be like 100 on Sunday. So I could do without the heat for sure. But
yeah,
anyways,
absolutely.
John, thanks for coming on and agreeing to be on the show. I guess just give us a little background of who you are, kind of what you do outside of the hunting world, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I have a wife, 2 kids. One's almost 3. One is a year and a half. I own a construction company, so I do design, build homes and remodels kind of central and northern Wisconsin. So one thing I would say that helps me with hunting is I am driving around a lot, and especially as we get towards fall, maybe even a little bit more. So sometimes it's easy for me to all of a sudden see an area that I wouldn't normally see just if I'm looking at Onyx. So a lot of times when I'm driving around like that, I'll just have Onyx open and be like, didn't know that little piece was there. Or, you might see an egg field that's on private, but all of a sudden the backside has some public that butts up to it, or maybe there's public a 40 or 80 deep from that. So that's kind of a little bit how, I've strategized and have such a wide area that I kind of roam for hunting.
Sure. Can you tell us a little bit like how you grew up hunting? Obviously, we're from the same area. Can you give us a little?
I started with my uncle when I was young. I was probably like 7 or 8, and I had kind of been waiting for him to ask me to go hunting, specifically rifle hunting. Obviously, that's kind of like what everyone goes out and does for the first time. And I remember he called the house and he goes, "Hey, do you want to go out hunting?" And he's like, "I'll pick you up at whatever time it was, like 2:30 or 2:00. And we actually hunted a farm just south of just like box blinds, or we would set up, on the edge or behind hay bales, whatever it was. And I remember he asked me, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll go." And then I'm like, "Oh, I don't have any blaze orange." And so we were in a box blind, but I literally wore like a red, like the brightest red sweatshirt I could find because I had no blaze orange.
Sure.
And then like he met me outside. He's like, "What are you wearing?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have any blaze orange." And so I was obviously wearing one of his giant jackets. But that's kind of how I started, just hunting with him just on that farm. And then he also had 72 acres and my grandpa had 80 acres that connected to that. So then as I got older, then I would go with him in those areas because I was all tree stand hunting,
Right.
And when I was younger, obviously that's kind of like your introduction is you go on a box blind.
99% of people in northern Wisconsin, that's how they, hunt, corn bait and understand nothing wrong with it, but things have changed a little.
Yes, for sure. And so, as I got older, I got my first golden eagle bow when I was 13. That had a big impact on me growing up is just like, we would hang out and look at the guns, look at the archery stuff, get candy, get a soda. And the owner at the time, he was awesome. He'd talk to you, he'd have all these big buck stories, and he had giant bucks all over the walls in there, including in his house. And he was always a successful hunter. So like, he would tell you stories and it would kind of get you fired up too. But yeah, so I got my first bow when I was 13, and then we just started archery hunting. It was almost like I would almost go every day after school. It was pretty common to go all the time unless the weather was really bad. And that was kind of my first introduction to deer cameras back when they had the big Bushnells with the 8D batteries in it. I remember my uncle got one from a customer, and he's a contractor also. So that's kind of who I grew up doing construction with. But he had gotten one, and we set it up, and it's like just this bright flash at dark. And, we'd get some photos of, your typical 100 to 110 inch, northern Wisconsin buck at a corn bait. And you'd be like, we're going to see that.
Just
we're
like,
gonna, we're going to shoot him. We're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
You're a 13-year-old kid, and you're like, look at that huge giant buck.
Right.
But obviously, as we all know, hunting like that, and you do it, and back then you're a kid, you're like, you don't understand burning out a spot or hunting a spot too much, or understanding that mature bucks aren't going to come to your corn bait, an hour before dark, so you can just shoot them broadside at 15 yards. So that was kind of how I really Yeah, any wind direction. Doesn't matter. I'm hunting every night. Doesn't matter where the wind's coming from. Yeah. So that was basically kind of how I got introduced into hunting. And ever since then, I've just, always been drawn to the outdoors between that and fishing. And so obviously back then too, and my mom actually called me probably, it was a couple months ago, or sent me a text and was like, hey, what do you want with all these magazines? So I used to get Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, and then Deer Hunter. And she has like boxes of them. And I was like, honestly, like you can toss, or I don't know, drop them off somewhere if you can even do that. But that was like a big part of it too, is I used to read every single article in there. But the problem that you realize later on in life is a lot of those articles are geared towards guys like Drury and all the Realtree guys that were hunting, these big farms and egg land, stuff that we've never hunted. It's a lot of big woods where I hunted even growing up. And so you would read these articles and think, oh, I can just go out and do this. And yeah, I'm going to go dive in here and rattle some antlers, and buck's just going to come running in. So I did learn quite a bit from reading those magazines. And I definitely tried a lot of things that failed and didn't work that you thought you could do, like just, we used to go still hunting all the time, or I used to by myself, even though my uncle was like, make sure you sit there and stay there until this time, and then we'll get out. And I'd be like wandering all around the woods and probably blow every deer out of the whole, 80 acres that was there. But, that was one of the things that you read and you're like, I could go try that. They're doing it in this magazine. So that was a big part of it. Just going out and, reading those articles, hearing stories from other hunters, and just kind of trying those different things as well.
Yeah. I think, talking about that, I mean, that's the whole reason for this podcast. We don't have 600-acre farms in southern Wisconsin or Iowa, wherever, those magazines aren't really catered to us for the most part. So really wanted to dive into this niche area and break it down a little more. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely, John. So as you kind of progress through just your hunting career, have you, so you're not necessarily in what we would like consider that like northern forest zone anymore where you live. But it sounds like you still frequent a lot of those areas. What is it with like these specific areas that keep getting you to come back? Is it lack of hunting pressure? Is it just the solitude of it? Is it just like the chance at a mature buck that like if you find one, even though there's not a ton of them out there, you're probably the only guy gunning him down type thing? Just kind of break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, I would say probably the number one thing is the lack of hunting pressure. I feel like we all know of areas that, are decent, but there's just a lot of pressure. So your chances of seeing a mature buck even, are pretty low as season goes on. Second would be just like the solitude of it. Like you get into some of these spots that I sent Tyler a video. I found like this, I don't know, it was like a shack made out of sticks that some guy was like living in that nobody knows about or has seen. I mean, there was like a bike there, a bike trailer. I was like, it was a little bit creepy, honestly. Like I'm still hunting. I went like 4 miles that day. You just see this like random like house that looks like somebody was probably living there, not at the time, but so, that in itself is like, it's just cool to be out there. And sometimes be in an area where it's like, somebody may have not hunted here in years.
Ever.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Yeah. So that's part of it. And then, I would say a lot of it is the topography, the contours. I'm more drawn towards areas that, have the different elevation changes, just for the fact that I feel like that's the easiest to hone in on. One, on onX when you're doing e-scouting. Two, it's a lot easier to like go in on those areas and, be on the transitions between, swamp and hardwoods, and be on those contours and be able to kind of quickly, follow around. So I've just had more success finding better deer in areas that have different elevation changes versus a lot of the flat areas that are around, the northern Wisconsin area.
Yeah. And piggybacking off that, do you find, because this is something that I've found in my scouting and some of the hunting that I've done, most of my hunting is in like that true flatland, more suitable for grouse habitat type stuff. So like vast aspen forests and stuff like that with maybe some mixed hardwoods, but not a ton. One thing I've noticed is when you get into those areas that I'm talking about, you get habitat change and you get diversity. And obviously in areas where you have thousands and thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of acres to work with, and you don't have a super high deer population, trying to pinpoint where the deer are can be a bit of a challenge. And then one thing that I've noticed is like when you have like a lot of monoculture, even if you have like logging and stuff like that, you don't have like that hard edge to really follow. And it seems like with the elevation change in the little that I have done is like you have a little bit more of a hard edge. And then like say some of these areas that have 40-foot elevation hump or whatever, you on those elevations that you're going to get more hardwoods that like drop down into like a hard transition into the swamp, where it's like sometimes some of these aspen groves and stuff like that, there's still a lot of sunlight that gets through the forest floor, and it's all kind of thick. Like on a map it looks like there's a transition there, but like it's so blended. So do you just think like when you're scouting and looking at these areas that it's a little bit easier to find movement and buck sign and travel?
Yeah, for sure. I would say most of these spots, especially after the past 2 years of hunting these spots more, that it's a lot easier to just pull up onX, and there's I forget what the name of the you can turn it on, but basically it'll do like, it's kind of like wetland, and it'll make it like a purple color. So you can turn that on and you can adjust it. I forget what the name of it is, but you can adjust it. And no, it's not the LiDAR. No. It's like,
I know
it's basically showing you like where the wet, it's like basically it goes off the contours, like the lower like areas, and it probably uses, it kind of uses imagery to know like, okay, yeah, like that's a swamp area. Like we can see tamaracks or whatever it is. So a lot of times I would turn that on, and it's really easy then to see where those transitions are. And I would just like mark spots, pinch points, kind of, rut funnel looking stuff, and then go in there, and immediately you'd go in there and it'd be like, yeah, the trail's literally right there, right off of that hard edge. And so, and I know exactly what you're talking about in the big areas of aspens. It's like, you'll see something and be like, oh, that looks like a transition. Like it would be decent, like deer, or like everything else looks the same. There's this one spot where you think, oh, they're going to be traveling through here. And you get in there and it's just, everything's the same. Everything's thick. It looks the same. And it's like, I just dove in here and tried to, break through all of this for nothing, basically. Not for nothing, because you are learning every time you're out, but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a lot easier to find those hard edges, and it's a little bit more predictable before you're going out and actually putting boots on the ground.
Yeah. So I guess just piggybacking off that then, so you kind of, we talked about like just your growing up, sounds like it was super similar to most of ours, Tyler and mine included. Mm-hmm. When did you start then diving into like this mobile hunting and stuff? Obviously you talked about like all these magazines and stuff and things you were reading. When was it where you're like, I got to ditch the box blinds and the ladder stands and start moving around and stuff and doing some scouting?
I would actually say I was probably in my early teens when I first started to, like, I would go sit behind like down trees and rattle, hit the grunt tube. So I would say like minimal mobile style hunting in that fact of just not like sitting all day type of stuff. So, I tried that in a few different areas, but really, it was actually probably my second or third year when I was going to UW Stout. I bought the Summit Viper climbing stand. Old Faithful. It was like the most comfortable stand still to this day. I don't care who you talk to. Like you could fall asleep at that thing so easy. But that was kind of when I started. So I had a few buddies that hunted in that Dunn County area. A couple of them actually shot really nice bucks, Pope and Youngs. And so it was kind of at that point that I started to hit up a few of those different areas, kind of around Menominee, trying to get in. But even then, like, it was just I wasn't spending enough time scouting. At that point, I was still like, I would literally like throw my stand on my back, hike in and be like, oh, here's a trail and this looks like it could probably be good, and just set up, which is not the way to do it.
Right.
That you find out later, but you have to do that
Most of the time, right?
Grow and yeah. And so it's like, yeah, you could get lucky. Like, yeah, I would see deer, but like, you're not going to, see a mature buck like what you want to see. So I would say that kind of kicked it off for me. And I just always used that climber for probably, I would say, the next probably close to 6 or 7 years. So I moved down to Winona, Minnesota, lived down there for 4 years, and I still kind of kicked myself in the butt for this, but I lived down in that area for 4 years, which obviously we know how great the hunting is. I was actually a Minnesota resident for 2 of those years, and I never once hunted deer down there at all. I was so focused on fishing at the time that I just completely wrote it off. Like, I remember going out and crappie fishing, rifle opener, and just hammering crappies on the Mississippi because not a single soul was out there. And so it was just like this weird time in my like hunting life where I was like, whatever, like I need, like, gonna take a break. And now I look back because we hunt that area and it's like, wow, how dumb was I to not take advantage of living right there.
Right. I often think of that too. I used to have a job where I travel a lot, and I often think of like, why didn't I bring my bow with? Why didn't I get in the woods? I was in southern Wisconsin a lot, a few different states, not that it's easy to just buy it on resident tag on a whim, but the southern Wisconsin stuff. And this was before, hunting public land was cool and stuff. And
yeah.
I had my bow, I had a climbing tree stand. Like, what the hell was I doing? Why didn't I get out? It's like, I couldn't wait to get back home and hunt. And it's like, well, I could have had some hunting opportunities if I would have, about it harder.
Yeah. I think then too, like you said, it was before like all these YouTube channels and stuff. And I feel like then, like, public land was, people thought of public land, or we all thought of public land. It was like, oh, like, there's nothing in there. Like, it's eradicated.
Yeah.
Like, there's no deer in there, or no big bucks, mature bucks. So I think a lot of us kind of stayed away from it. And so that's probably one of the reasons I think that I didn't try when I was down in that Winona area. I actually remember one time I like was looking at it at OnX one time. It was like, oh, this would be like a cool area to try to go hunt, and never did anything. But yeah, I think it was just kind of early in the stages of like guys being on YouTube and being like, look at what you can do on public land, which obviously has helped quite a bit, obviously grow the sport. Also probably has hurt it a little bit too, in certain areas, but you still need growth no matter what. So
yeah,
with our generation too. I mean, hunter recruitment is really big. So, but go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, for sure.
John, something I keep thinking about that I was hoping you could break down for us. The day you shot your nice buck last year, I think I was texting you like that morning, and you sent me pictures of your buck that evening. You were a long ways apart because I know the area you were in. And when I talked to you later, you were a long ways, like, probably over 50 miles, I would guess. Like quite.
Yeah.
Quite a long ways. Can you break that down of how you went from one area in the morning and all of a sudden you were 50 plus miles away from where you killed your deer and ended up killing that? Can you tell us about that?
And
yeah. So
maybe to interject real quick though, John, before you do that, maybe just break down like your season, like how you started with it first, and then like how you got to it, maybe like start from the beginning.
Yeah. So I would say this season was a lot different than other seasons in the fact that I spent way more time in the woods, just boots on the ground, scouting, looking at different areas, driving, all over to different spots to check stuff that, I e-scouted. And I did that probably the past 2 years a little bit, but this year was completely different. Like, it was off the charts compared to any other year. And Tyler knows our buddy Josh Bartz too. So like me, him, Tyler, like we all talk quite a bit as season approaches. And that was one thing that, Josh was doing a lot of too. And so it was like also helped motivate me to want to do it as well. But I was like, I just basically told myself, I was like, unless I get out there and actually put the miles in and really look at these areas and dive in. And before I would just like, you'd go out and like scout and be like, oh yeah, like this area looks pretty good. There's, this transition, there's this. But I started watching, like, I don't know if you guys have watched Johnny Stewart at all. He hunts in
Love
PA.
his stuff.
Yeah. So like one of the things, that always stands out, he's always about the scouting. It's like, you need to spend 98% scouting and 2% hunting. And so like, I just really took that to heart coming into the season. And I was like, I don't care if I spend the whole season scouting. Like, I just need like to find, 3 or 4 spots that are going to be like, and then pick your tree, like the kill tree. Like, that was another thing I never did, is actually like stand there and break down the area and be like, okay, this wind, this is the tree I need to be in, like pinpoint it, like exit route, map the whole thing coming out, figure it out exactly to a T. Because a lot of times I would go into these spots, like you'd find a spot and then you wouldn't do any of that. And then you try to go in there in the morning. And you guys know how it is. You get in there, it's dark. You're shining your light up in trees, making a bunch of commotion, a bunch of noise, trying to figure out what tree you should get in. And then you think you're at the tree you want to be at and you're not. And then it gets, light out and you're like, I'm not even in the game right here. There's this tree in the way or this brush in the way or whatever it is. So I actually tracked like most of my trips. I think I showed Nicola like one spot, all the routes I had taken and like all the pins and everything. And I think I put on almost 60 miles of scouting this season before I shot my buck. So just, you can't substitute being out in the woods and actually looking at the areas for anything. Obviously, e-scouting helps a ton. You can spend all the time you want e-scouting and then get out to, and then like be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go hunt that and not scout it. And then it just be a complete bust and opposite of what you thought it was.
Right.
So that was really kind of my main focus.
When you said 60 miles, was that all in-season scouting?
Yes.
Impressive.
Yeah.
In-season scouting.
That is impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I basically...
Yeah, I get, like, because you have young kids and a family and stuff like that. Was it pretty much like start of season, then you really started doing more in-season scouting, or did you have a bit of time in the spring to go preseason scout stuff or summer?
No, I didn't do a single hike or anything out of season. The only thing I did is I hung a camera at my father-in-law's, because there's a couple spots that we will catch bucks, that are, growing in July into August, but nothing that, I went and looked at. It literally was after season. I think I texted Nicola. We were kind of both scouting like a similar area, and that was very early season. And that was literally like when like I kicked off, was probably like the week before that. So it was September, probably 17th or 18th, something like that.
Sure.
Yep.
All right. So then,
John was texting me and he said, hey, I'm on that road too. And I got back to my truck. John was at my truck. So he found me.
Yeah. 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 He's like, I'm right there too. So I was leaving. I drove down the road and I was like, oh, there he is. I'll wait by his truck. He'll be coming out soon.
I guess in hindsight, that particular day, I had gotten probably like 2.5 miles deep at my farthest point, and I never set up. I got all the way back because I just didn't like the sign I was seeing. I was lackluster in that spot. So came back out to the truck. So I guess I wouldn't say I'm putting 60 miles on, but I tend to do a lot of that too. In the past, I think, was it last episode, Matthew, I was telling you that my greatest success has come from in-season scouting? And
you and I have talked about that a lot too, because, part of it's a time thing, but like I've been putting in a lot of spring scouting over the last 2 years now that I've kind of put all my chips in on just like focusing on northern Wisconsin, just because I'm just like bent on shooting a good one there someday. And so I bet like the last 2 years, like I've taken PTO in March and April to like go over there, do the whole thing and stuff like that. But what I gather a lot from Tyler and from what you're saying too, John, is like just time in the woods, regardless of the year, the time of the year is beneficial. And I think what you guys do a really good job at that I'm really hesitant about is like, I don't want to have too much scent in there. I don't want to, like I was the type of guy that I think I took. So John, you're talking about like when you started doing this, because you're a little bit older than I am. When you started doing this, like it truly was DIY. Like there wasn't the hunting public. There wasn't Johnny Stewart wasn't on YouTube yet. Bo Martonic wasn't on YouTube. These guys weren't on and doing these podcasts. When I was a sophomore in college is when like the hunting public started. And so I remember getting home from class and like just binge watching every bit of the hunting public and like, what are they doing? What are they doing? Stuff like that. But like, it ended up like, not just the hunting public, but like all these different people, it ended up influencing like Dan Infalt, stuff like that. Like it ended up influencing how I hunted. And you start to realize real fast that like all of that knowledge is awesome, but you have to filter it through your own experiences. And so like Tyler, like there's been so many times I've talked myself out of situations where it's like, I wouldn't take that scouting loop or I wouldn't go sit that tree. Cause I'm like, well, what if the wind, what if the thermals pull it a little bit wrong? Or what if I get my boot scent on one trail, even though I'm hunting two other ones? What if, and so it's like, you just get this paralysis by analysis, but it sounds like both of you guys, like you do a really good job of just like the deer are going to do what the deer do. You just have to go out there and interpret the sign.
Yeah. And I think a lot of these areas too, they're like, their primary travel paths, their primary travel corridors, their home range. And I don't think going in there and putting your scent on the ground, or even if they, if you wind bump them or whatever, I don't think they're just going to be like, oh, I'm getting out of here forever. I think it's a little different in those areas. I also don't feel that in the areas that we hunt that mature bucks have like, this is where I bed all the time. I think it's very variable depending on the food source. I think they're very, they're opportunity betters. Like they know these areas like, okay, the acorns are dropping here at this time, the white oaks, and this is like the bedding zone that I bed in, while I'm feeding in these areas versus later on down the year where it's, like where Tyler and I went in during muzzleloader, I think it was. And all of a sudden we just found some oaks that were just hammered in an area that, there was like no sign earlier that season. So it just, I think it just really depends, but I just don't think that, regardless of the time of the year, I know there's a lot of guys who are like, you need to get in there, March, April, get in there early and then stay out and don't go back in there, which I agree with some of that. But then also I look at it from a standpoint of, what was the weather like? How much rain did we get? Is the forage going to be the same as what it was the year prior? Also, a lot of these areas, like the deer aren't even in some of those areas at that time. Like I feel spring is good for finding scrapes, rubs, like historical rubs, stuff like that, where you can be like, okay, like, there was definitely bucks hitting these scrapes this past fall. I think it's great for that because you can see them. Like I usually do that during turkey season, but you can see them. They stand out. There's nothing growing yet. There's nothing on the ground. Like, mark these on my way. So I think that's very helpful. But I don't, in a lot of these areas, like trail cameras, I have way too many, but I think that's a big part of my success too, is just putting cameras in different areas just to get a quick inventory. And even you'll notice like when you're in there and you set it up, like you can tell they're a little weary and, if you get a buck on camera, it's probably not for a few days later, but I think it all goes back to normal after a little bit of time for sure.
Sure. Yeah, that wasn't that mind-boggling when we found those red oaks with, just a couple inches of snow on the ground in December. Remember that, Matthew? I texted you about it. Like the red oaks are, and they were just tore up. Like that was, I've never even thought of that in December, and they were tearing them up. That was one of the more interesting things I've ever seen in the woods while deer hunting, for sure.
Yeah, but you think about it though too, Tyler. It's like you're saying, John. Like when I'm spring scouting, it's like, this is great, but you also have to like some of the areas I hunt, going back to like more of the flatter aspen patchwork type stuff. Like I don't know when the last grouse hunter ran through there with their dogs. That can kind of reset things. Maybe not for a week, but it could have been a couple days ago. You know what I mean? So that could have reset. So, and I think that's also something that's super fun about hunting these big woods areas is like every year you kind of have to refigure it out. So like the spring scouting, like you said, John, is like, it's really good for figuring out the skeleton structure of an area. Like, oh, this is the general travel. You know what I mean? This is where the rut sign has been historically. You still kind of have to go back in there and like ground truth it in the fall. And I think that's You know, because who knows, that area that you guys were hunting in muzzleloader season, maybe there was just a bumper crop of white oak early in the year, or maybe there was just some fresh clear cuts that they were munching on all year, and then there was just enough red oak acorns on the ground that by December, bam, that's where they were congregating. And obviously, in those lower deer density areas, you probably had the doe fawn that was starting to come into heat too. Some of these, or these does that didn't get hit in their first cycle. And so that's where you get like those areas that are tore up in December. So it is kind of interesting. You just like, you never know. I think the spring scouting is valuable, especially because it's like, I think I started like really diving into like getting into the like run and gun mobile hunting in northern Wisconsin seriously 3 years ago. And for the first 2 years, I didn't scout because I was hunting other states and stuff. I didn't scout much over there. And it was just like kind of what you're saying, John. It was like, oh, I'll just e-scout this. And I actually know Josh Bartz too. And I was texting with him and I was, because he hunts in a very close area to where I hunt. And we were kind of going back and forth. And I was like, oh, yeah, this looks like a sick area on paper and stuff like that. It was like, you just go in there and it's like, oh, there's just, for whatever reason, there's not deer in there. Maybe because there's not a lot of deer in that area, or they could be on the next ridge over, hitting different red oaks, stuff like that. You just don't know. But going in there and getting that intel is good if you can in the spring, but getting that intel in the fall is what's going to matter for the deer that you're hunting right now. So yeah, I guess, sure. John, kind of going through your season then, you had mentioned your trail camera strategy. Before you kind of dive into your success story from last year, how has your trail, and you had talked about, the old trail cameras with the, the D batteries and everything like that. How has your trail camera strategy evolved over the years, and how has it kind of made you a successful hunter as of the last couple of years?
Yeah. So obviously we all started out with the old style, and then, we went to the smaller Bushnells with double A's, and still kind of a pain though, as far as like having to go pull SD cards. Like we obviously used to let cameras soak for way longer, and a lot of times we might even miss out on, a certain time of the year where a buck would be in that area that you really wouldn't know until later in the season, because, you didn't always get a chance to go hike in there and check it. Or a lot of times, kind of like how Johnny Stewart does, he would just leave one there all season and then check it at the end of the year, which I always had probably like one or two where you'd have like thousands of pictures of those and nothing else. That was mostly what happened. But yeah, I mean, once cell cameras came out, that was kind of like the turning point, I feel like, and really honing in on being able to get those pictures and kind of evaluate, the time of the season, what was happening, kind of how you had to hunt those areas. So really for me, e-scouting and finding those spots, going out there, verifying the sign that you're looking for and setting up those cameras in those areas, that's kind of been a big one for me. It's just like spreading them out all over as, far as possible to all these different spots. That way I can have, higher statistics of possibly seeing a mature buck, or a deer that, I want to chase. So, the cell cameras have obviously been a game changer. I mean, that's first and foremost. Yeah. We all know. I mean, that's probably why a lot of different states are banning them now, on public land and other areas, which understandable. Like it's almost a little bit, it's kind of crazy that we're able to do that even.
Right. Yeah. It does suck, but at the same time too, like you were talking about, like, especially in the setting of like northern Wisconsin, it's like you still have to be a hunter. Like, and not to like discredit any of the plains states or anything like that, but if you got a corn pile and you have low pressure deer and you got a cell cam over it, you can probably pattern that 150 pretty easily. Killing them is maybe a different story. I play devil's advocate there, but it sounds like you're using these cell cameras. You're just getting you can cast a wider net because you don't have to walk in and check them all the time, but you're still being the hunter in the sense of why was he even there in daylight? Why was he in this block of the woods when he wasn't in that block of the woods? So it sucks that you hear about all these places banning trail cameras on public land, especially in like northern Wisconsin. If you can have that slight edge, I think it is just as good as, because we can't glass deer. You know what I mean? For the most part, so it's like you don't have, like, there's no edge there. So when you're going in and you're putting, like, this is a spot I'm going to put a camera, like what warrants the spot where you're like, yep, this is where a cell camera's going? What are some areas that, like, for examples?
So this year a lot of those spots, because I was doing in-season scouting, I actually found a couple actual hub scrapes. This is the first time ever that I found a legitimate hub scrape in season. Like I'd probably seen it before, but had no idea, why they were there. I was probably, that was probably from last year or whatnot. But I think I was sending Tyler pictures. It was in probably, I want to say it was late September. I think it was late September, early October it was like $4 or $5 in one frame. And they're on this giant hub scrape. And there was like 7 scrapes in a row, probably all within 30 yards. But the one was, it was massive. It was probably 8 feet long, super big rub on one of the trees right there, like hip high, and put up a camera. And it was probably 3 or 4 days later, and all these bucks on the camera. There was probably, I want to say 2 bucks that were, close to that Pope and Young-ish size, a couple, up and comers, but like pretty cool to set that up and see that. So that's kind of what, really, when I did that, that was actually like the first one I think that I set up right away. Early season, I was like, I need to get out and find more areas like this and like get some more deployed so I can kind of see what's going on in these other areas. So it was pretty much after that, I was going out, like I said, finding these transitions, finding different little oak flats. Kind of early season like that, I was more so looking for oak flats that were in these transition areas, kind of like even smaller ones that were hidden, that weren't necessarily like these giant, like ridges or anything, where oak flats are high. Like I'm talking, big. Yes. Yeah. Like I'm talking like smaller, quarter isolated to half size of like a football field, like isolated, like dense, where deer feel comfortable. Like John Eberhard always talked about that as like the security cover.
Yep.
And so I think that's pretty important, is like kind of having that in mind when you're looking at these different areas. Like when they're walking in, they're like, do they feel safe coming in and out of here? Like, is this an area that a mature buck's going to visit, and possibly during daylight hours because he feels completely safe? So kind of looking for those feeding areas, but also kind of looking for edge bedding a little bit too along the way, which I did find quite a few, buck beds kind of on like these little high knobs in these swampy areas right off of transitions. Same thing, like going back to Dan Infol. I think you learn a lot from him as far as bedding, especially in like swampier areas. So that was kind of some of my tactics for there. A lot of these other spots, I'd find some doe bedding, and then I literally would find the closest scrape that was to that doe bedding, set a camera up high in the tree. And sure enough, it'd be like 2 days later, here comes a buck in. It's a northeast wind. He's coming from the southwest, comes right in, does a quick little loop, and he leaves. And it's like, that's exactly what they're talking about. Like, that's the first time I've seen that on camera, like a buck actually coming in downwind of doe bedding. And, everyone's always talking about it, like, you got to get set up here. This is the area. But it's really hard to sometimes find that, especially in the big woods. I feel like just like bucks, does too will bed sporadic depending on the food. So it's hard to really go in and honestly, and Tyler, you can both attest to this. It's like, sometimes it's hard to even find like doe to like kick up doe out of areas. Like I'll walk 6 miles. I'll walk 6 miles and like, I won't even kick up a doe, but yet there's, this whole scrape line or rub line, and, you get pictures, but it's just kind of funny. Like there really isn't a whole ton of deer, like just bedding all over the woods that you're just running into. They're pretty specific in the areas that they're bedding for sure.
Yeah. And that's super interesting. So it sounds like, just so I'm making sense of it, a couple follow-up questions. A lot of your success as far as a trail camera strategy on these scrapes are finding very specific food sources, in this case, oak drop, specifically white oak drop, near like more bedding complexes that are in swamps. Did you ever run into, because like what I'm dealing with is a lot of swamp, but more so swamp. And then I have a lot of heavy logging activity in the certain area that I've been picking apart the last 2 years. Did you find any of that where the oaks butt up to, say, an 8-year-old clear cut, and you found a rub line, a scrape line?
Yeah, there's a lot of areas. So like a lot of these areas, like I'm calling swamps, they're more like lowland, wetland areas, but obviously they're swampy. They're not giant by any means. It's not like you're going out and there's, 500 acres of just swamp. It's like smaller patches of, 100, 200, 300 yard swampy areas that are all lowland. It's surrounded by, fingers, ridges, stuff like that. That's where obviously the oaks are. But there are a lot of those areas that are budding up to aspen growths that are that 8 to 10, even 15-year-old areas. And that's where you find a lot of those good transition points too, is you have some of these areas where it's the lowland area transitioning to like a finger ridge with oaks. And then all of a sudden on the backside of that, there was logging activity that happened. And so like, it's just a hard transition. It's so easy to hone in on those areas because they can't get through, obviously, the aspen growth. They're not going to go through the swampy area. So, they're coming on that finger, through the hardwood, and they're also feeding on it. So that's kind of those little micro habitats that I'm trying to look for.
Yeah, I think that was something that I struggled with in the first couple of years of doing the public land thing. And it was a little bit of a social media influence, I think, was I'm watching all these YouTube videos and I'm like, oh, I got to get in the thick stuff. And especially in the morning when you've never scouted an area, I'm walking in, I'm making so much noise, I'm getting all sweated up. And I'm like, they're not going through here either. Like, just you don't have to hunt thick just to hunt thick. In fact, all the mature bucks I've gotten on camera and my decent buck sightings over the last 2 years have been in relatively open area where they're standing, but they can take 2 bounds left or right, or maybe behind them, and they're in security cover. So it's like I found a finger this year too, where I think is a primary scrape. I'm gonna set up a trail camera on it here in August. It's just a finger of hardwoods that butts up to a creek that the beavers logged, so it creates dammed up, so it creates even a harder edge because it's all swamp there now. And then it gives rise to I think it's anywhere from 4 to 6 year old cut, so just above my head now, but still pretty thick, and there's a lot of browse. And then on the other side of that is like a 30-year-old cut. So it's like, it's in that like monotonous, doesn't really do much for them phase. And I found this really hard trail that ran right through the center of this like little pie crust. And I mean, like in the middle of the pie crust, boom, licking branch, scrape. And it's like, yeah, it's wide open in here, but it's like a 3-acre patch in which they're just traveling through. Like a mature buck is going to do that. He's not going to bust through brush if he doesn't have to. And so, yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess my other question on the scrape itself is like, that's awesome. My goal someday is to find some of these bigger hub scrapes, these big mega where you're like, yeah, that's a primary scrape. And it's hard to find them naturally in, Tyler and I talk about this all the time. Like there's a couple guys I follow on social media that hunt big wood stuff that they make their own primary scrapes. And eventually if it's in a good enough area, a lot of these deer take them over. But I've always wanted that challenge of finding them, like the natural ones too. Have you noticed some of these scrapes that, you talked about John Eberhard? I've read and listened to a ton of his stuff. A lot of times he's talking about it's not even the scrape itself, it's that licking branch. Have you been running any cameras over some of these scrapes that are maybe not as big surface area wise, but it's got a really good licking branch that you've had like a lot of activity on?
Yeah, so actually where I ended up shooting my buck, there was and it's funny because I didn't even notice at first that at the time, I didn't notice any scrape. And it basically was like a 4-way intersection of trails that came together. And the only reason I put the camera there is because I was like, oh, like, little mini ridge here. And there's actually a lowland swampy area to the south of that. So like, you kind of know the deer are following this from, this land over here across the public, and then across the road was logging activity, and they just had caught a bunch. There was probably some other areas that were 3-4-year-old, and down the road a little further, there was like that 8 to 10-year-old aspen growth. And so it's like, this looks like, a pretty decent spot to throw a camera, not a super far walk, but actually, so I set the camera up there, not knowing that there was actually a licking branch on one of the pine trees right there. And so that was like the very first video picture. I think I sent it to Tyler. It was like a 9-pointer that was super tall. And that was the very first buck. He comes in, hits the licking branch. And I was like, I had no idea that was even there. And then every buck after that hit that licking branch. And then once every buck started hitting the licking branch, then they started a little scrape. But it's still, it was probably maybe 16 inches, if that. Like it was more of like a traveling, I call it like a traveling scrape, where they're licking the branch because they know there's no activity through there. They're hitting the scrape like a couple times, and they're going. Like it's strictly travel corridor, but yet, hey, this is like, we need to scent check this. And I have does on camera hitting it as well throughout the season. So it's just kind of cool to see that and kind of learn how they'll use those little licking branches like that in those types of areas. And, sometimes it's worth throwing up a camera when you find something like that. Cause there's a lot of times you'll be going through the woods and be like, oh, there's a licking branch right there. And then you look down and usually there's, either a small scrape that you can see from last year, or maybe it's already active. And then in some instances, you'll find some that it's literally just a licking branch and that's it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Seems like, like, is this stuff that you would have thought? I look back at like the first couple of years that I was just diving in on like specifically northern Wisconsin. And one that haunts me is there was this licking branch in a scrape that was tore up underneath it. And it was on a very faint, I'm talking like an 80-year-old logging trail, like very faint, that dropped down into this small little swamp. Like you're talking about maybe 7 acres, and it comes up into a hardwood ridge into like a 1 or 2-year-old clear cut. Like they're not bedding in there. It's like, it's open still. It's just a feeding area. And I look back on that and I'm like, knowing what I know now, I probably should have thrown a couple sits just right on that old logging road that was coming up out of that swamp. Have you noticed that over the last couple of years where it's like some more of this nuanced, subtle sign is actually the sign that you need to be on, or at least put a camera on and not pass up?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of scrapes, especially all the areas that we hunt on these old skidder roads, that I probably would have I've overlooked a ton of them all the time. Like you park the truck and you go in like 100 yards and there's one there and you're like, oh, whatever, like we're just going to keep going. That's, nighttime only or whatever it is. But last year and the year before that, I set up cameras on some of those. And actually sometimes I'll turn the leaf layer off on X and you can see those old skidder roads. A lot of times that's where I'll start in an area.
Yep.
It's just walk those roads. It's like
I'm a huge proponent of that.
Resistance. Yep. Like, and I think mature bucks are similar in, after looking at trail cameras and footage, it's like, they don't, you have to think about it. They're chasing all these doe around. They're hungry. They're thirsty. They're putting on miles. The last thing they want to do is go try to run through this thick aspen area or whatever it is. Like they literally, during that time, especially pre-rut, they're cruising all these skidder roads. They're taking, the shortest path over these ridges that they normally wouldn't take. And so, like you said, it's worth throwing up a camera on some of those because, during that time period, they could be coming around in that area first thing in the morning, late morning, whenever it is, midday, and hitting those scrapes just because no one is ever there, right? Or, it's very early morning, somebody's going on these skidder roads walking in, or it's late in the evening walking out. We all know, like, matured bucks, they notice and they can tell like how old scent is. It's no different than like a bird dog, right? Like a bird dog can tell if it's a fresh grouse scent or if it's maybe older. So it's no different than that too. So I feel like, a lot of people do overlook areas like that on skidder roads or places that seem a little more open or even, close to parking areas, same thing. So I've definitely scattered quite a few cameras on even some of those too, especially because it's easy to just get an inventory of the deer in that area too. You might throw one on there and it's like, oh, it's just a bunch of 2-year-old bucks, but at least and that you can continue moving on in that area, get deeper, check out other spots.
Right. John, I have to ask, how many cameras do you have?
15.
It's quite a few. All cell cam? Damn.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's manageable because you're being strategic with it. So I think that's a great segue to pull us out of the rabbit hole and kind of go back now.
Yeah.
So setting up a lot of these cameras early season. Did you have all 15 roughly deployed by like October or?
No, I mean I was getting new ones and putting them up like pre-rut.
Okay.
I think I put some new ones up like peak rut too.
Okay. So
like I would be in these areas and I would all of a sudden be e-scouting and finding a new area. And I was like, I just need to get in there and throw up a couple cameras. So it'd be like,
I feel
November, 1st or whatever it was, or even, post that. But yeah, I mean, I was just trying to get out as many as I could in these different areas that seemed pretty decent. And honestly, just to learn too about the other areas, just because I feel like the more areas that you can have, in the more cameras and the more deer, statistically, you have a better chance, especially we all know certain spots don't work with certain winds and there's a whole lot of different variables, especially with timing and the time of year that, some spots are good this time of year. Other spots are, going to be better at this time of year. So trying to figure that all out too, and try to keep a little bit of a journal on that stuff as well. Yeah. So I'll back up a week because it ties into where I was hunting the morning of the day that I shot my buck. So it was like the week before I was hunting this other area, and this wide 9-pointer that I had on camera for probably, I would say maybe a month or so. He had disappeared for a few weeks, and then we were getting into that pre-rut time, and he popped back up in this area. And I think I was like sending Nicola videos the morning that this happened. And so I actually went in there on a different wind, and I went in blind, but I knew exactly where the trail was. I actually had it marked, but where the side I was coming in from, I'd never came in from before, but because of how the wind was, I was like, this is the only way it's going to work. And he had just been in there. And so I was like, you know what, let's just go throw a sit at it. So I get in there, get set up, and it was, probably 10 or 15 minutes after sunup. And
This would have been like October 25th, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was like 24th, I think, or something like that.
Sure. Okay.
So all of a sudden I hear something. I look over, and there's like a small little 6-pointer coming out of this drainage. I'm like, oh, that's pretty sweet. Like, seeing a deer, that's a win. Like 5 minutes later, another buck comes out of this drainage, and it's like a 5-pointer, something small, scraggly. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. Like 2 bucks in one morning sit. Can't beat that. Like, that's a win. And all of a sudden it was like another 5 or 10 minutes later, all of a sudden I hear a grunt, and I was like, what the heck? And so like, obviously I grabbed my bow right away, because I was like, no idea what's going to happen. It's from the other direction off this finger ridge. And all of a sudden I hear running, and a doe is running by. And then behind her was this like real messed up 8-pointer. I don't know if he like got damaged or something, but real messed up 8-pointer. And he's like on her, like hard. And I was like, yeah, this is weird. Like, it's like, I feel early, right, for something like that to be happening. But anyway, so like I had my bow. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And like, I was just getting my phone out to like record it. Just so I was like, oh, it's this small buck chasing this doe, nothing crazy. And then all of a sudden, probably 10 to 15 seconds after that, all of a sudden here comes that wide 9-pointer behind the 8-pointer. And he's just like trailing behind him at probably 50, 60 yards, but literally running everywhere that they're running. And he goes down towards the transition by the lowland, swoops back around, and then comes right in front of me at probably 25 yards. The doe does, and then the 8-pointer. And then so I have my bow, because I'm like, if this buck is going to continue, this white 9-pointer that was after is going to continue to just keep falling, like, I have a chance here. And it was all happening so fast. So he comes out 25 yards, and I pull back, and I grunt to get him to stop. Well, when I grunted, he didn't stop. He literally just turned 90 degrees instantly and ran right towards my tree. He thought it was another buck. And he stops at 7 yards, and he's facing me frontal, and there's red brush and everything else in the way. And then for like 3 seconds, and then he just takes off after the doe again. So doe was just running around in this probably 60, 70 yard zone that I was hunting, and the 2 bucks are just trailing her. They're like doing figure eights and everything. And I'm still have my bow back, and all of a sudden he like comes across at 30 yards, and I grunt again at him, and he stops. And of course he's behind stuff, and it was like 30 yards. And so I let my bow down. She takes like one big loop by the lowland again, and then literally comes right towards me, jumps right underneath my tree. Meanwhile, that 8-pointer goes right underneath the tree, and that wide 9-pointer goes right underneath my tree. And I'm trying to stop him the whole way. Like, I'm yelling at him at this point. And so behind me is a little bit of a lowland, and then it goes right up to this steep ridge. And I got him to stop like 3/4 of the way up this ridge, but there was absolutely no shot. He was like 45 yards at that point. And so I was like, well, and my heart's going crazy. And it was like Snapchatting Tyler and Bart's and everybody. And I was like, the craziest thing just happened. And so I was like, looking at the weather and the wind and stuff later that day. And I was like, I don't have anything else going on. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go sit in that. The wind was switching. So I was like, I'm going to go sit in that same area, but I'm going to go on it would be the southwest side, and sit on the opposite side of the trail where I was. Just whatever. See if anything else. Cause there's another buck in there that I definitely would have shot that on camera. I was like, who knows? Obviously, like, this is where they're at right now. Like, there's a lot of action happening here. I've seen 4 bucks this morning. So I go back out there in the afternoon, and I get set up in that tree, and I was sent for probably about an hour and a half. And I think it was getting close to, I don't know, I want to say like 5:50, 6 o'clock, still when it's light out at that time of year. And I'm not even kidding you. I'm sitting there, And all of a sudden I hear a grunt and I'm like, there's no way this is happening again. And I'm looking off to the right and I could hear running. And I look off to the right and 80 yards away is that doe with that scrubby 8-point behind her, chasing her. And I was like, there is no way that this wide 9-pointer is going to be behind this buck just like this morning. There's not a chance. Not a chance in this world. So I grab my bow. The doe is probably at this point like 20 yards from me. And they're in everything to the right from where they're coming from. Like there's no shot. It is super thick. And I have like a 10-yard area that I can make a shot that's on this trail. There's a scrape right there too. Actually, this is probably where I'm sitting is about 60 yards from that hub scrape that I was talking about earlier. So they're about 20 yards from me. And all of a sudden I see him and he's like 65, 70 yards behind the 8-pointer, literally doing the same thing they were doing that morning. And I was like, and they're like, they're running, like they're hauling ass. Like it's going to be very hard to get them to stop. So I get my bow and like I pull back. And so I'm like looking this way while I'm pulled back, like watching him. And there's a pile of brush that they're jumping over. It's probably like 10 yards long to clear it. And I was like, I'm going to murp at him. Like as soon as he jumps over that brush, I'm hoping that he's going to land like right where I could shoot. And so he's coming through, I'm watching, and I literally grunt like as loud as I can right as he jumps. And when he lands, he stops. And where does he stop? I can see his whole head, his whole rack, and he's looking right back, towards my tree, not up at me, but towards the tree. Like, what was that? And all his vitals in his front shoulder are behind this 2-foot wide pine tree. And there I am. And I'm like dying inside, right? I'm like, and I'm thinking he's just going to take like half a step. Like in your mind, you're like, he's going to take half a step and I'm going to shoot. It's going to take whatever. And he was just like, you could tell he was moving his leg forward. And I was literally just getting ready to shoot. And a little bit bad on my part, like to be more patient, but instead of moving forward, and he literally only had to move like this far, he like hopped a little bit. Well, when he hopped, I thought he was moving forward and I shot. And luckily, I sent Tyler the video afterwards, but he hopped enough that my arrow literally just hit the bottom white brisket hair on the bottom of his chest. And so and he runs off and he stops at like the hill and he's fine. He just keeps going. And I just see this wide rack just falling behind that 8-pointer and the doe. And so of course I'm heartbroken. I get down, look at the hair, and I'm like, yeah, it's a clean miss. There's not even meat on my arrow at all. It's literally just, there's a pile of hair and there's my arrow with nothing on it but dirt. And I literally sent a video and I was like, well, this just happened. And so that was pretty heartbreaking, but also cool, like to get in that position. Also crazy that same thing would happen twice in a day. I was like, that will never happen again, ever in my life, to be literally 30 yards from the trail I was in that morning and have those same deer in that same area doing the same exact thing. So it's kind of crazy. Like it makes you wonder how long they were doing that for. Like obviously I'm sure they bedded down during the day, but just kind of wild. So sorry, that was a little bit long-winded, but so the following week when I shot my buck, November 3rd, I went and sat that area that morning, but in a different spot, like probably about 250 yards away in another neck down area.
Can I
went and sat
pause
there
you for 1 second?
Yeah.
John?
Yep. Sorry, go ahead. Yep.
Just a quick thought I was having. So kind of tying in your tree stand selection now with your trail cameras. When you're putting these trail cameras, because this is something that I'm selfishly asking because I don't know if I have a couple setups this year that's kind of the same thing where I got these heavy trails and then it's like boom, scrape and licking branch. And it's just like, I'm gonna set up some trail cameras, but are you hunting a lot? Like, can you see trail cameras where you're setting up your tree stand a lot? Or is it more just, I'm putting it here for inventory and then I'm using the topography around it to set up?
So that one spot, like I said, it was probably 60, 70 yards away from that hub scrape, but still close enough. Like I could see the strap of that camera. Same thing where I shot my buck at, I was hunting 35-ish yards probably from my camera. Right in there.
Okay.
I think it's very variable though, depending on the location. Because sometimes there's spots that's like, oh, this is a great scrape, but there's nothing to sit in, or it's too thick, or what have you. So obviously you got to back out or go one way or the other and try to find like the next best area or the next scrape. Okay. But certainly, yeah, there's a lot of spots that I had cameras that, yeah, it would be sitting relatively close to them. I was that November 3rd, so I went out that morning, hunted that area. I saw 2 small bucks, nothing else. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I'm already over here. I'm going to just go throw like a 4-mile scouting quick in this area that I've been wanting to look at that I thought would be good. It's a little bit deeper. It takes longer to get to. So I go over to that, scout it, find some good sign, find some scrapes. My plan was to kind of scout it and then probably throw a sit in there just because of all the action that had been going on in that area. I thought maybe I could catch something cruising. But as I was in there, I was just like, I'm just not like feeling any of these spots. And like, it was pretty far in there. And I'm looking at the clock, and I think it was like 1:00 or something like that. And I was looking at the wind, and the wind was switching to a northwest. And so I was kind of like calculating the time ahead. I was like, okay, if I can get out of here in like 35, 40 minutes from where I'm standing to my truck, get in my truck and drive basically, 50 miles to this other spot, I'll probably be able to get in there and sit for like an hour, because I had this buck coming through on camera, like anywhere from 10 to 5 minutes, like before shooting hours. And so I was like, you know what, we're just going to do it. Like, why not? Let's just do it. Like he showed up twice now coming through there. So hop in my truck, get all the way over there, park, come in from the southeast. And I bad on my part, I didn't pick a tree in that spot because I didn't really think I would be hunting that exact spot. I literally just put that camera there for the sole fact of like getting inventory of the area. I never thought I'd be sitting there. And so I'm like looking at my Onyx, and I'm trying to walk in because I know where my camera is based on, having leaf layer off. Like I could tell where that intersection was. So I'm walking in, I'm trying to like pay attention to that because I want to be southeast of my camera because of how the wind's coming. And there's a trail coming from basically southwest to northeast, and then one coming from, northwest to southeast. And so like, I kind of want to be in that like buffer zone where they're not, I'm not going to get, basically be upwind of where they're coming. And I'm on my Onyx, and how like sorry, go ahead.
Are you so your tree stand location, are you in that small ridge? Like, are you in the hardwoods, or are you like tucked into like the swamp a little bit more, or what was the setup like? Yeah.
So this whole area is probably was like a cut like 30 years ago. So it's all popple trees that are like, 8 inches, like roughly. Yep. And so there's like not much to sit in at all, but I'm like, you know what? And so where that trail is, there's like this mini ridge, and right at the top is where that main trail was that he was coming on. And it's probably I would say from the bottom lowland to that upper portion, it's maybe, like a 20 foot elevation change, not crazy, but the last like 10 feet happens pretty quick. Like it's probably in a 20-yard span. And so I was just off of that. So the other problem with that is like, I had to climb a little bit higher. That was when I brought my 4th stick, because I was like, there's no way 3's going to work, because I would probably be eye level with them at that point. So I'm going in there with the Onyx, and it kind of, like it'll freeze sometimes and like your dot's not moving. Well, I didn't notice it did that. And I actually walked in so far that I hit like probably a yard from that trail to the south that I didn't want to even get near, because I was like, there had been a doe that had been coming from that trail up past the camera. So I was like, I didn't want to get that far, because obviously she's going to, smell something's up. So I push back right away, find a tree to get set up in, climb up, get set up. And the temperature drops like 5 minutes after I'm in the stand. And so I'm like putting my jacket on while I'm in the saddle. And it was probably 5 minutes later, all of a sudden I hear movement. And like I slowly look back to my left, and it was that doe coming up that south trail. And sure enough, she gets right to where basically I stepped, smells it, and starts blowing and runs off, runs down into that lowland swamp area. And I was like, you know how it's just like so disheartening when that happens. You're just like, this is over. Like, this is, drove away over here. It's not going to be worth anything. But then also part of me was like, you know what? They blow at anything. They'll blow at a coyote. They'll blow at, whatever. Like, it's not, I'm just like not going to let it affect me. I was like, it's fine. We still have time. There's probably 45 minutes or 50 minutes at that point that buck had been coming through. I was like, I'm not worried about it. So it's literally 10 minutes, probably I'd say like 15 minutes before shooting hours at this point. And I was like, you're starting to get like, when it gets down to the wire, and you're like, it's like, in my head, I'm like, it's probably not going to happen, whatever. But like, cool that I came over here. And not even 3 minutes later, all of a sudden I hear a crunch, but it's from that south trail. So I thought maybe it was that doe or something that was going to come through there. let me back up. At first, when I heard it, I thought it was coming down the north trail, which is where that buck had been coming from. So I grabbed my bow and it sounded like it was coming from there. But you know how stuff sounds when you're in the tree and whatnot. So I hear some crunching and I'm like waiting and I'm waiting. And I'm like on my D loop and everything. Like I'm ready. Like I'm picking out the spot that I'm going to stop them and shoot them on this trail that's coming right in front of me. And as time goes on, I'm listening and like I'm turning my head and I'm like, that's not coming from that way. That's like behind me. And so I'm like kind of looking back to the left and trying to figure out what it is. And finally, like I see some legs and I'm like, oh, look, there's a deer there. Didn't know what it was. Couldn't tell if it was doe, buck, what have you. And all of a sudden it's coming closer up from that south trail. It's coming up. It's just browsing around as it's like making its way up towards this trail. And all of a sudden through like this hole, like this big in the leaves, I just see like one side of the rack. And immediately I was like, that's a shooter buck for sure. I thought it was the one that I'd been getting on camera. So I have to completely turn around, like you guys know, in the saddle. I'm facing this way and I'm just waiting. And he's coming closer and closer, not on the trail, straight south of me. And he's getting close to where my boot track was. And I was like, there's no way, like he's gonna hit that and just be gone. Well, he keeps coming and there's a pine tree, between him and I at like maybe 18 yards or so. And he gets past that. And so like right when he got behind that pine tree, I pull back and he literally gets another probably 2 steps. He's at probably 16 yards and he's like quartering to me like frontal and, big THP fan. I was like, they shoot deer all the time. Frontal. I'm like, we're going to send it. And so he literally stops. And at that point he put his nose down and hit my boot track. And you know how when they hit something like scent wise, and then now at that time it had cooled down enough that my thermals were now coming down directly to him. And he does one of these and looks straight up at me. And as soon as he looked straight up at me, I let it fly right in between there. And at first when I shot, I was like, oh, did I just like make the biggest mistake, like taking this shot? Never taken one of those shots before. And I was like, and I'm listening to him and I'm just trying to be very quiet. And I'm listening and I hear him, he runs straight down and he gets in that lowland and I hear him stop and then I hear nothing. And then 5 seconds later, I hear what sounds like a crash, but I was unsure if he was just blowing through some stuff or what it was. And so I'm freaking out. I'm like, I'm like sent a video to Bart's or something. I was like, I just messed up like this whole hunt, shot at this buck. And he's like, what's going on? I'm like, you know how that is. And so I just waited like 20 minutes. It was completely dark. Got down real quiet because I was just unsure of the whole situation. Got down and I get to where I shot him and I see blood everywhere. And you know how when you see blood everywhere, you're like, you go 10 yards and you're like, this deer is dead. Like there's no doubt in my mind. And so I literally get probably 5 yards past where I shot him and I see my arrow and it's broke off. And there's only like this much of the fletching and the arrow that's broke off that's out on the ground. And I was like, oh, it was like full penetration all the way through the front. And as I go, like there's more and more blood. Sure enough, I tracked that it was probably 60 yards. And when I heard that crash, that was him crashing right at the bottom of that lowland area. So super pumped up and excited about it. And I think I like video messaged some people. I think I sent Nicola a snap right away. I had very bad service though. So like nothing came through, but going back to family, first thing I did though was I FaceTimed my wife and my daughter at the time. She was on there and like you could see the racket and we watched like THP and stuff since she was like probably 6 months old. And she like, one of her first words were like big buck. Like she's always saying big buck, big buck. And so like FaceTime, she's like, that's a big buck. And so like, that was super cool to be able to share that with them.
For sure.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it was just super cool. Like last minute, off the cuff, like, hey, I'm going to go over to this spot and try it out. And it ended up working out.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That is
story. Awesome season.
Yeah. That is one heck of a story. That is super cool how that was all able to kind of come together for you.
Mm-hmm.
One other follow-up question on the hunt that you were successful. That little high spot, was it just a little spot? Was the entire thing surrounded then by like a lot of like just lowland, wetland, or was that more of a finger? And
so that was kind of like this just very subtle ridge that ran along kind of the whole there's like a mini ridge that ran like the full length of this land. And then it finally cut across to this area that was getting logged off. And then everything to the south of that was that lowland wetland. So like you knew they were only going through that certain zone.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of food and browse on the one side, and then on the other side, there's some higher stuff, bunch of oaks, stuff like that. So I think the the bucks that I was getting on camera were just kind of going back and forth, checking those two different areas. So I think that was just strictly travel corridor, a pretty small area too. So I think kind of like overlooked area as well, which helped out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super interesting. I have a spot in northern Minnesota picked out for this fall that I want to check out. That's similar to that, where you have a small pond. It's actually a lake. It's probably like 50 acres, not a big lake, but you have a big lake or big pond. And then at the very southern tip of it, it's just like a drainage that runs, and it's just like alder swamp for maybe a half a mile, but it's not very wide. It's probably only a couple 100 yards wide, but it's literally a buffer zone between high ground with like a 5-year-old cut, and then on the other side is just oak ridge. And so I'm hoping that that's a similar situation where you get bucks, you get that parallel travel between bucks checking the oaks and bucks checking that clear cut area back and forth. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, because it's going to be a quick hunt. I'm only going to be up there for a couple of days. My wife's got a cabin up there, and she gave me the go ahead to hunt a couple of days when we were up there in the fall. So I'm hoping that's a very similar situation then. But
yeah, for sure.
Wondering if you have plans or anything significant for this coming season?
Yeah, so there's a couple areas that I had some pretty decent bucks in that I didn't even hunt. Saw them all on camera, a lot of daylight bucks. So I'm pretty excited for this coming season. I feel like the one spot for sure, which Tyler knows of, I think that's a pretty good spot to be successful. So I'm kind of looking forward to checking that area out a little bit more and actually picking a tree in that area. I kind of want to go out there, like I was telling you guys, a little bit early, just to look in that area, because I don't think they're quite going to be in that area this early yet. So like I said, I got a handful of spots that I really want to dive into and pick a couple trees, because I feel like they're going to be pretty good come pre-rut and rut. So looking forward to that. So that's kind of an exciting thing too. Like I was just telling Josh the other day, it's like, I will put a camera there, but part of me is like, I don't even want to put a camera there, because I kind of know like the dates that I feel like they're going to be in that area type of thing. So kind of excited about that. I have a few other pins that I dropped recently in some other areas that I want to go check out too. So want to go check out some of that too. Excited to, there's a lot of oaks and stuff over in that area as well too, that I was pleasantly surprised when I did a drive-by through there, and a lot of those ridges, high knobs, stuff like that, like the stuff I've been hunting in other areas, a lot of that over there as well. So pretty interested in checking out all of that as well.
Yeah, you showed me that one. Now there's going to be 10 of my cameras in there.
Yeah.
There's going to be a hunting pressure of 3 now. No.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody could shoot a buck out of there, I'd be happy. I wouldn't even care who it is.
Oh, I appreciate
that's like that's like part of me too, is like we say, like we can have, as many cameras as we want in the area. Like you still have to be in the right tree at the right time on the right day with the right wind to make it all and make the right shot for it to happen. And so I'm more than happy, like Tyler said, like there was a couple spots I showed, like I shot my buck and I was like, dude, go sit here. I literally just had 4 bucks daylight in the last 3 days. And guess what? I don't have a buck tag, but I would be happier than snot if you could send me a text and be like, hey, shot one, come help me drag it out now. Like I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think just with the what we want out of this podcast, John, and I think you're highlighting it as we're wrapping up so well right now, is I just think if you have the mindset that you're going to go into some of these areas and there's going to be a lot of blanks. You know what I mean? You have to work to get on the deer. I talked to Tyler about this a lot. I haven't done a lot of out west elk hunting, but I've heard comparisons where a lot of people draw to elk hunting, where it's like, if you can get on the deer, like the challenge in the big wood is just getting on the deer. If you can find the deer, you can generally find the good one that's probably with that herd. But it's so addicting to get up to some of these vast areas and being like, all right, I got 30,000 acres to work with, ready, go. And just kind of piecing some of this stuff together. And like you said, like, it's kind of what makes me tick. or makes us tick as far as you just have these options. Sometimes that can be a bad thing, and you have almost too many options, but I don't know if I could bow hunt the rest of my life on just like one 80-acre piece anymore. It's just like, it's so fun to bounce around and just do this game and play this game with deer all over. So yeah, I think that's
it's nice to have those different habitats to hunt too, so you don't get bored of hunting the same thing over and over.
And I think you did hit one thing on the head too. I think in years that those oaks are dropping, it's especially if you get the combination of the white oaks and the red oaks. So you got early season draw, and then you have a draw that'll sustain them through. And I'm talking enough that'll keep the deer. And I actually talked to a logger a couple of years ago, and he said it's almost better when the deer population is just a little bit lower, because he goes, deer that I was hunting back in 2004 would have cleaned up all these oaks by mid-October. Now you have a food source that's kind of sustaining until, shoot, you guys were in muzzleloader season with tore up sign.
Yeah.
In some of these areas, there's not enough deer and squirrels and whatnot to clean up all these acorns. And if bow hunters start realizing that some of these Northwoods hunting, northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, if you can start spinning some of these things into like an advantage for you, I think, you can make these situations work, as you obviously highlighted from your success last year.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. In closing, anyone that does listen to this, I think just the biggest thing is you just have to get out in the woods. Like you can't, obviously in your off time that you're not in the woods, watch all the YouTube videos that you can, because like we said, you will learn so many little things that all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's like very relatable to the scenario that I have. And that way, at least you can take action on that. Or the next time you're scouting, you can try something new. So learn, I'll call it offline, and also get out there in the woods and just put boots on the ground, because you just can't substitute having hours in the woods and, learning the different sign, the different food they're eating, the locations they're in. You just have to get out there. It's just first and foremost, for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah. I told Tyler in closing, I told Tyler the other day, I was driving home from work, and I almost had the revelation that, as guys, we have this bravado, we have this pride, right? Me hunter, me hunt deer, and I think so many bow hunters out there have this pride about hunting public land and being so tough. It's like, I really think the true killers, the John Eberhardts, the Dan Infalts, Johnny Stewarts, those kind of guys, they're all like nerds at heart. Like it's the nerds that are the good hunters. It's the guys that are like, they don't care about how cool they are and, how many miles they run to go hunt the hills and stuff like that. Like that helps you, right? That's good preparation. But like, they're just fascinated by every little thing that they can pick up anytime they're out there. And I think that's what's like, go make a bunch of mistakes for the sake of, you're always getting better. Like you said, John, as every time you're in the woods. So just learn. So
awesome. Real quick, John, please tell us about your business.
Well, yeah. So actually this spring, I left the company I was working for, a residential construction company. We, built houses, did remodels, also reconstruction. So started my own business this spring. It's kind of always been an aspiration of mine, and I knew I would eventually. I just didn't know when that would happen. And, sometimes I think you just have to make the leap and really, go after your dreams and follow them. So, that's what I've been doing now. It's been 4 months. It's been, the best thing I've ever done. It's stressful, it's hard, and everything's on you. But I feel like, same thing relatable to hunting, like everything's on you to get it done. So just like in, being an entrepreneur, it's the same thing. Like no one's going to be there to do it for you. You got to do it for yourself. And I feel like that relates to everything in life, hunting, work, family. So yeah, I've just been focusing on that and trying to grow that business. And
what's that
also looking forward to hunting season. John Garcia Construction.
Awesome. Yeah. If anyone's looking for construction, I see the pictures. John does awesome work. So any of the 15 people listen to this one, I'm sure they'll get you lots of things. So John said, get in the woods and follow your dreams. I think that's a good way to end it. It's very motivational, John. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We'll probably talk to you in the fall then, John. Yeah, no, we'll probably, we'll talk to you in the fall. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you later, guys.
Thanks for listening to the show. This is Clear Cut Chronicles, and we'll catch you on the next one.